In Hebrew, the word for garment, beged, comes from the root bagad, bet gimel dalet, to rebel. Similarly, a me'il, which is a coat, is connected to the word me'ilah, which means misappropriation of sanctified contributions. According to the Talmud, the word for clothing, lavush, is comprised of two words, lo bosh, you shall not be embarrassed. Inherent in all of these connections is the idea that our clothing is connected all the way back to the first mention of garments in the Torah, which is during the story of the Garden of Eden, when Adam and Eve betrayed God's trust, or at least the covenant or contract that they had, the misappropriation of the resources they were offered, the betrayal, and the rebellion they launched. Once we were innocent, once we were not embarrassed by our bodies and physical reality, but then they required a cover-up, both in terms of its material meaning and in the metaphorical sense, literally and figuratively. Clothes came, a beged, to respond to the bagad, to the reality that there was a rebellion. The me'il, the coat, came to respond because there was me'ilah, a misappropriation. Now, given that connection between clothing and sin, the Gemara goes further to suggest that crime lies at the heart of the prohibition of shatnez, that there is a reason why we don't mix wool and linen, despite the fact that some call it a chok and that we can't explain it, that in fact, Cain, who was a farmer, murdered his brother Abel, who was a shepherd. And thusly, we don't mix plants and product of the earth with the wool, the byproduct of animal life. So clothing not only reflects sin from the Garden of Eden story, crime from the story of Cain and Abel, clothing is intended to serve as a constant reminder of those aspects of life and human potential. And they are a wake-up call towards our becoming more holy in our thoughts, actions, behavior, and treatment of others. This, in fact, is why Parashat Tetzaveh and the entire project of creating sacred space in terms of a portable tabernacle also includes a very important set of instructions regarding the garments worn by the Kohanim. And whenever we think about the idea of priests serving in the Mishkan or the temple, we think about and remind ourselves of the Torah's understanding that the entire Jewish people would become a nation of priests, that it is used both literally and figuratively. Each of us, in our own unique ways, serves God and may serve God in a holier way than we thought we could before. Our garments are to be a reminder of that potential, possibility, and pursuit And with that, the outward manifestation, the covering we make, is not just a cover up, but garments that gorem machshava, that create thought, that inspire and move us towards holiness. This was the idea planted in the heart of our first sacred precincts and our first sacred pursuits after we were freed from slavery in Egypt. After we were given the opportunity, wandering through the wilderness, to think of ourselves as reclaiming the purity and the holiness and the specialness of the Garden of Eden, a garden all our own in a land God promised. In chapter 28, verse 38 of this week's Torah portion, one item that Aaron the high priest wears is described as being on his forehead, and there for a continual reminder of all possible holy action and pursuits that human beings may make, that we as a people might accomplish, that for sure those who truly wish to serve will live up to. והיה על מצח אהרון ונשא אהרון את עוון הקודשים אשר יקדישו בני ישראל לכל מתנות קודשיהם, והיה על מצחו תמיד לרצון להם לפני אדוני. The golden frontlet, the tzitz, it will be on Aaron's forehead, that Aaron may take away any sin arising from the holy pursuits and the holy contributions that the Israelites may consecrate. Aaron will wear this, and upon it we remember that it says Kodesh LaHashem, holy to God, holy for God, holy in a godly way, in search and pursuit of godliness. That tzitz, it was there, according to Rashi, Sheb'sha'at ha'avodah, at the time that there was holy work to do. What would Aaron do? It would provide for him not only a reminder because he was wearing it, but something that he could touch and induce himself to remember that the special and unique headband in that case, words upon it, Kodesh LaHashem, should be as a crown that he could touch at the right moment during his performance of all that must be holy, in order to really become the person, the servant of God and the Jewish people that he needed to be. When he wanted to act and perform in a holy way, he needed a physical, material article of clothing to remind himself of such. For that reason and for that example, we in our own generation wear tefillin on our heads, have kippot upon our skulls, some wear a chain with a Magen David, the word Chai, their Hebrew name. These are articles of clothing, items that remind us of those beautiful garments that were created for the Kohanim back at a time that we were first on the pathway towards the sacred pursuits defined by Torah, by Moses, our teacher, through the giving of Torah at Sinai. And, sometimes we do wind up touching our yarmulke, our kippah, those of us who wear it might tell you that it falls one way or another and you have to fix it. Well, sometimes it's just worth a moment of contemplation, going and touching it, reminding ourselves that to be in pursuit of all that is holy and right, moral and good, based in Torah, reflective of our Jewish souls, how we want to shine our lights in the world, that sometimes we do need physical reminders in order to do that. How often do we use the talit to wrap ourselves? How often do we sit among those adorned as Jews do so often wear their ritual garb, tefillin in the morning? How we can come close to that in an egalitarian setting and be around these physical reminders that enrobe the Jewish people, dor lador, generation to generation. In a world where choices about our dress, our garb, our jackets has been challenged because of a desire for being so casual, might we reconsider the power and possibility of all that clothes could come to represent? This is not an argument for one set of black and white Jewish uniform type of clothing. This is not an argument that the kippah has to be worn every minute or moment of the day. But I recount for you a beautiful and wonderful story of our beloved, Zichrono Livracha, Herbert Shapiro, for whom we were sitting Shiva this week with his family. And Herb, by the side of his couch, just beside it, in order to prepare for the so many times he lifted his voice to chant Torah in our congregation, Herb had his kippah and a chumash. He had his yarmulke to put on his head to remind him that it was time to turn to holy study, and that the study was a holy act in order to help refine his own soul. As an educator of city kids in New York in the public school that he was a principal of, and later in day school at Park East as the director, Herb knew what it meant to have not only Jewish neshama to share and shine light into the world, but to embrace Jewishness inwardly and outwardly, to be an example for all Jews everywhere, to embrace both universal and particular pathways as modern Jews in the city of New York. When we talk about wearing a unique set of Jewish clothing, we talk about rededicating ourselves to the tefillin of the head and the arm, like Aaron wore the tzitz, the headband that said Kodesh LaHashem. We talk about putting on a yarmulke, putting on our talit in the mornings, to remind ourselves that we go enrobed with a unique godly light. Should we tune in? Should we embrace? Should we allow for that light to shine upon us? These garments we wear in prayer then send us off to be part of the normal, productive, material world and society in which we live. But we cannot discount the possibility that choosing the garments that remind us that we have more potential for good and holiness than sin and crime and, God forbid, anything worse, is an essential part of our Jewish tradition. Wishing you wonderful reminders in every way of just what it means to attach ourselves to holiness and goodness. And maybe after so many months of pandemic and less acquisition of the garments that we might have purchased throughout the year, think about when we go to the store next, when we go to our wardrobes. Which garments shall we wear to be enrobed in the kind of royal way that our tradition calls for? And what's the next purchase? And how do we create more holiness through our outer wear so that our inner lives become more deeply connected to that kedusha, to that holiness that was always essentially reminded by the garments of the high priest and the clothes themselves that God provided Adam and Eve on their way out of the Garden of Eden. Shabbat Shalom.